Hey everybody, today is Monday, December 4th, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from Napoleon, editor Sam Restivo.
Our first assemblies on all of the battles were like twice as long. Not because there were more story beats, it's just there's more battle, more fighting and all that stuff. And when we were watching earlier cuts of it, it's like, man, this is exhausting stuff. The screenplay was like 130 pages long, but there were 239 scenes in it, which is crazy. It was just such a huge thing. And so we had a lot of different options, different directions that we could go. We needed to have the entire film assembled to show him before he left. That Sunday, we showed him the whole movie. It was 4 hours and 33. And the number one thing I think I could say is that it was relief. He was like, oh my God, there's a movie.
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Well, bonjour, mes amis. That's French for hiya. Welcome to another strap yourselves in, take no prisoners episode of The Rough Cut. How's that for an open? Well, it's what I got for today, so it'll have to be good. And today we are talking about Ridley Scott's new film, Napoleon, which is convenient because we have Sam Restivo, one of the editors of Napoleon, as our special guest. I suppose we could have talked about another movie, but Sam might not have the same insight on that. But he knows a ton about editing Napoleon. Alongside legendary editor Claire Simpson, Sam and Claire took on the tremendous task of encapsulating within the confines of a feature film the rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte and his complicated love affair with his wife, Josephine. Ridley Scott is the director, Joaquin Phoenix is playing Napoleon. How could that not be wild? And it is. So lots to cover with Sam. It would have been lots to cover with Sam and Claire, but Claire had to drop out of the podcast at the last minute. She and Sam are working with Ridley again on his follow-up to Gladiator. But while Sam is doing his part back in LA, Claire is over in Italy. And her schedule, not to mention her internet situation, was just a bridge too far for getting her on the show this time. I will tell you that, aside from all her films with Ridley Scott, she also started off her career cutting for Oliver Stone. She did Salvador, Wall Street, and Platoon. And she won an Oscar for Platoon. And all that's great. But the coolest thing about Claire is that her first feature was a little movie called Chud. And if you're not old enough, or weird enough, to know what Chud stands for, I can tell you that it stands for Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers. And Ridley Scott did not direct that one. But maybe Claire can talk him into doing a sequel. For now, we are focusing our attention on Napoleon. And focus we will in just a minute. But first, let's do some learning about our friends and sponsor, Extreme Music. Say, young filmmaker, are you making a raucous biopic about a famous French military commander turned emperor? Well, if you are, you're going to need great production audio. And if you're not, you're going to need great production audio. Because music is so important in making your film or TV show work the way you need it to. But not just any music, you need the best music. Music made by the top names in producing and composing. Junkie XL, Atticus Ross, Sylvia Navarro, Deadmau5, Mickey Mouse. Sorry, just kidding. I can't help myself, you know that. But you can help yourself to great tracks from these great artists by going to extrememusic.com and searching their enormous catalog using terms like tempo, lyrics, composer, genre, instruments. Speaking of instruments, did you know Extreme Music gives you the ability to pick which instruments you want to use from these tracks? It's true. They also give you options for the length of the track. And of course, you can use their amazing reference track technology to give them a track, and they will find you ones from their catalog that are just like it. How about that? Technology to help the human race, not overthrow it. And when it comes to humans, they have them. Nice ones. Who can help you with the licensing of your tracks. Or if you're one of those independent types, you can do all that licensing right there on the web as well. So the next time you need great production audio for your big movie or TV show, check out our good friends at Extreme Music. All right, showtime. Won't you please welcome, from Ridley Scott's new movie Napoleon, editor Sam Restivo. It's a little unsettling when you don't know who it is that's listening.
Yes.
I doubt it's Ridley. You know, in some of the press that Ridley Scott and Joaquin Phoenix have done for the film, there's this sentiment that this is not a biography. It's not meant to be a detailed historical account, rather an exploration of Napoleon as a person and his love affair with Josephine and France, for that matter. Just as a quick aside, I'd like to know how much you knew, Sam, going into this about Napoleon or French history.
What I learned in high school. Basically, I'm just a normal American person. And once we knew we were going to do the job, Ridley is awesome about including the editors in even early. Like we get, advanced copies of the script. He's had this 35-year working relationship with Claire that he'll actually send the script to her and say, what do you think? Do we need all these scenes and all of that stuff in advance? And I mean, I did, cursory research and stuff. It was more about the things that would impact us would be what would the music of the time have been. And so we were already looking at classical needle drops and stuff in advance of the shoot. We had multiple phone calls with Ridley discussing various classical composers for their music.
Well, since you mentioned composers, composer Martin Phipps, he talked about how Stanley Kubrick's film Barry Lyndon was a point of reference from Ridley in regards to the tone, which makes sense because Kubrick developed Barry Lyndon out of research he had done for a film about Napoleon that he never ended up making. Did Ridley give you any references thematically or stylistically for you to draw from?
So that was the main thing. The North Star for us was frequently Barry Lyndon because the three of us really loved that film. The ironic sense of humor was the main thing that we were leaning on editorially. Now, that movie is far drier than what ours is, but he didn't mind, at least in the initial assemblies of things, of it being a little bit, he would say, pedantic and keep shots a little bit longer in that kind of vein. And we kept to that once we got down into the refining of things. Did we start trimming things a little bit because we just had so much story to tell.
Philosophically, as an editor, do you typically look at a project like it's incumbent upon me to go do research or any kind of homework about the subject before going in? Or do you just like to go with, well, this is the script I got, these are the dailies I'm getting, and that's all I need?
A little bit of both. I did some research through books and stuff, but I didn't read all the Napoleon biographies or anything like that. And I knew that we weren't doing a documentary. So once I saw the script for the first time and saw the tone of what it was going to be, it's like, no, this is all that I need, and went from there.
What did, if anything, did Ridley say about what he wanted to accomplish with this movie?
So he is very cognizant of wanting it to be an entertainment for audiences. So it's two ways where he's making the film for himself. Absolutely. For him, if he's happy with the film, then that's all that matters to him. Because he's earned that after the insane amount of experience that he has. But on the flip side, he's aware that people are going to pay money to come to a movie theater and see it. And so he was always encouraging us to lean into the entertaining side of the show. Him with the battles, that's Ridley Scott. That's what he does, bread and butter. But with the humor and the intimate scenes between Joaquin and Vanessa, he was like, yeah, let's have this be as enjoyable as it can be.
Regardless of what you already knew about Napoleon going in, you're going to have audience members who know very little. I'll raise my hand for that. How much of that did you and Claire take into consideration in terms of what you had to do to give the audience some context or at least the necessary minimum knowledge about this time period and these people?
Right. So the legend at the beginning was a whole thing trying to figure out exactly how many lines there should be, what we should set the world as being with Marie Antoinette and the state and the revolution in France and whatnot. There was that. And we needed some element of letting people know that Napoleon himself is not actually French, that he was Corsican. And so that's why that last line of ambitious young Corsican gunnery lieutenant went in. And then we were trying not to overwhelm people with dates and settings, but we knew that there had to be a level of that just to accomplish the passage of time and to orient people somehow with what was going on.
So in that vein, there's a few choices or decisions that you and Claire made that I'd like to ask about.
Yeah.
As you said, there's some things you're going to need to explain for the audience. Certain characters, when they would come on the screen, you would have titles, but not for everybody, just for very specific ones.
Not for everybody.
Why those characters and what sort of discussions did you, Claire, and Ridley have that eventually led you to, okay, this is how we're going to have to do this?
So it was normally whenever there was an important military advisor person, they got a card. Juno didn't get one because he was only in the first part of the movie. But then it was both Calancourt and Talleyrand that had massive parts throughout the entire film that we wanted people to just casually be aware of them. Like with Talleyrand, because he actually shows up at the very end as part of the Congress of Vienna as one of the guys that turns on Napoleon. So we wanted him to have a card for that point. Again, it was also a thing where we didn't give more cards because we didn't want to overwhelm people with too many things.
So please tell me that you and Claire had some sort of French Revolution family tree where you could keep track of all these people, because these names and their titles and their roles, it's got to be overwhelming. Oh, it was. And, and it's something that we wanted to point out as well, based on all the things that we've read in press and whatnot. There were multiple historians on the film. So there were countless people that were correcting the facts and figures and stuff that we were working with. And
In fact, getting the exact right title for some of these guys was something that went through multiple revisions as different historians said, no, it would actually be something closer to this at the time.
So even during post, you would have those kind of check-ins with these historians where they would almost do a review of your cut?
Yes, that happened multiple times. In fact, right at the very end, once Sony was going to release the film theatrically, they actually had a different set of Napoleon historians that gave us notes after we were done, and we just had to go back and revise some titles. It was mostly about the actual number of dead at the end, because it is a bit open to interpretation. With a battlefield like Waterloo, it's really kind of hard to actually get the total number of people that died, and if you're going to include all sides of them, and then also civilians and stuff as well. It's a lot of different schools of thought about what the number should be.
Any of these historians ever get too comfortable and sort of lean in and go, Sam, the pacing on this right here, for the second act for me?
No. Thankfully, no.
Stuck to facts and figures. Okay.
Yes.
There's another element of the film that I think is something you lean on a little bit to help set context. The letters between Napoleon and Josephine. Yeah. They serve multiple purposes. They provide context, almost sort of like a reset, okay, here we are, here's what's going on. They also work as transitional components between scenes. As you said, Ridley's bread and butter. He has these amazing battle scenes, but also these very dramatic dialogue-driven scenes that sometimes are funny, sometimes they're not. So I'd just like to talk about that component of the film. Was that text derived from the actual letters between them? Was there more? How did you go about employing those pieces of connective tissue?
So that was always scripted that way in David Scarpa's script. He always referenced it from actual letters from Napoleon, which there's hundreds of letters from Napoleon to Josephine, but there are very few letters from Josephine to Napoleon. So there was a little bit of kind of figuring that her stuff out later on. But so Joaquin had recorded some stuff for us while they were shooting, I believe, but we didn't employ the voiceover until pretty late in the game. We knew it was going to be a thing that came in, but we kind of wanted to cut the scenes and have it and see if we could not do voiceover, just, if even only as an editorial exercise. But when it came down to it, we were missing that extra, that layer of understanding of the two of them, and also keeping them connected for those long stretches. She has a letter that's in when he's going through Russia, and that was a really important thing to keep her included there. And then the really controversial one for us was the final letter, which is after she's died, which we were like, well, does that? We realize that doesn't make sense, but it's a really fascinating thing to suddenly kind of conjecture this into Napoleon's mind, that she's literally haunting him after she's already died. And we ultimately were like, yeah, you know what? That is super cool. We should do it.
That ending, what I was not sure of is when that letter was supposed to have been written. Was that prior to him coming back to France from exile? Where would that letter have been in the timeline?
Right. So in that letter, by the way, is a complete amalgam of a variety of different sources from Josephine. That one would probably have been when he was on the way back from Russia. I think that was those words we had considered for that point earlier on.
So for that ending, it's the sentiment of what she's saying rather than the context that really matters.
Literally, yes, exactly.
I talked about the letters being, in effect, a point of transition between scenes. Yep. Then there's literally a stylistic transition you do a few times. You do these flashes to white, or just a build to white, overwhelming the frame. I think only a couple times, though.
Yeah, it's twice. Yeah, that was Ridley. That was a Ridley thing. He knew we were going to have a big explosion at the end of Toulon, and he liked the idea of going to full white out there. And he liked, since we don't really we introduced Josephine after the end of the Reign of Terror. And he liked that flash to white after the prison to land on this mysterious person walking through the streets of Paris. He loved that image, so we went with it.
For people that haven't even seen the film yet, one of the things you're hearing about is that the actors speak in their natural accents, which, from my perspective, I think is almost 100% of the time the right way to go. But you deviate from that at least once in the film. There's a scene where Napoleon's trying to build bridges with Austria.
Yeah.
And he sends an emissary to suggest the king's daughter should marry Napoleon.
Yeah.
And that is done
in Austrian.
Original language with subtitles.
Yeah. Yes.
Why?
So they shot it both ways, actually, where they were speaking English and then speaking in Austrian. And We just loved the Austrian ambassador's performance so much. And that the joke played better with the, is this a joke? And then he says, His Majesty does not think so. And it just, the cadence of the way they spoke to each other in that moment actually just was kind of funnier to us. So we went with that.
So you said that was shot both ways. Were there other instances that were shot both ways that you considered doing that with?
Not many, honestly. There was some Russian stuff with the Tsar Alexander. That actor actually speaks Russian. And there were a couple of instances where he had done that too. But we already put so many title cards and dates and stuff that we didn't want to also put a ton of subtitles, where it made the most sense in that one instance because we were making a joke of it. And it was clearer and funnier that way.
I don't want to just breeze past that decision to let the actors speak in their native accents.
Yep.
Was that always, from day one, that's the way we're doing this? Was there some discussion about that? Were there pros and cons for doing it either way?
We weren't necessarily party to the discussions that went on with that, but we know Joaquin was like, no, I'm going to do it this way because he didn't want to complicate it with trying to do a French accent and maybe not have it work out or something and have that be the thing that people are commenting on. So I'm assuming that they've just followed his lead with that.
2 hours and 38 minutes might sound like a long runtime for a film, although not lately.
Yeah, right.
But when you consider you're encapsulating Napoleon's rise and fall and then weaving that with the love story between him and Josephine, that's actually very little time to tell that story.
Yes.
What aspects of this story that did make it into the film did you wrestle with the most in terms of getting the point across without slowing down the pace?
Right. So our first assemblies on all of the battles were like twice as long, and not because there were more story beats. It's just there's more battle we can do, more horses and more fighting and all that stuff. And when we were watching earlier cuts of it, it's like, man, this is exhausting stuff that we needed to rein each of them in to a certain degree so that we could lean into more Napoleon and Josephine stuff and try to always center it back on their relationship. Virtually all of that stuff is in the movie, as much as we possibly could, of the two of them together.
So before the film even came out in theaters, it was announced that there would be a 4-hour director's cut released on Apple TV. I would assume that, okay, well, a director's cut's a director's cut. It's part of the process for any film.
Yeah.
But in this case where, hey, get ready for it, there's a 4-hour version of this coming to Apple TV.
Right.
Does that change the process for you at all, or how you address the director's cut, knowing that it's definitively going to be released?
Well, no. So in this case, the movie that was released, 2 hours, 38 minutes, is always and was always our intention for a theatrical release of the film. We were always aware of overall length, and we thought 2.5 hours of movie was basically the most we could put onto a captive audience because, again, there's just so much history, and the battle scenes are so intense, and then there's this the sense of humor that is probably unexpected for a lot of the audience that we wanted to make it like palatable for most audience members, and 2 hours 38 was absolutely perfect for us, and Ridley was all on board with that running time. Having said that, the screenplay that David wrote had so it was like 130 pages long, but there were 239 scenes in it, which is crazy. Like it was just such a huge thing. And so we had a lot of different options editorially, different directions that we could go. We were always going to focus on the relationship with Napoleon and Josephine. And so Claire and my first assembly of the movie, so the first time we had every scene in to show it to Ridley, not like an editor's cut or anything, like just straight assembly. That was 4 hours and 33 minutes, which was like crazy talk. Because I mean, the movie was never, ever going to be that long. We were not going to have, a 25-minute version of Waterloo. But when we started cutting the scenes down and stuff, we realized that maybe we were repeating some thematic things or some beats, and we didn't need to have all of these things. But for a streaming environment, if this happens, by the way, because it's still just an if, that there are plenty of different extra bits that people at home might actually enjoy seeing if they're fans of the film.
Well, I'm looking forward to the if it happens 4-hour director's cut of the film.
Yeah.
You've touched on this a few times, so I think I might want to jump ahead and just get right into it. And that is the comedy of the film.
Yep.
There are these comedic beats that are just sometimes ludicrous, sometimes like, wow, I can't believe I just saw that. And then I'm going to let one joke go here because I just have to address it with you. And that is, Napoleon is arguing with a British general or whoever it is, but he shouts, "You think you're so great because you have boats."
Exactly.
Which is, a big laugh break in the film for the audience, at least for the audience that I saw it with.
Yeah.
So just knowing when to play up the comedy and when not to, like how much can we really lean into this without it being almost farcical and really taking away from the love story?
Right. We were threading the needle a bit with that. So lines like that and the lamb chop line and all of that are like very, they're not, I don't think necessarily like anachronistic per se, but like they're definitely lines that are very literal and very just, they're very funny. And we don't have too many that are like that because we knew it wasn't like a slapstick comedy or something like that. But we were always, so Claire and I, when we get the dailies each day, we knew what the script was, but we were just kind of seeing what the actors were giving us. And we're the first audience in that case. And so whenever something like really amused us, it was like, well, let's go in and let's see if it can stick. And Ridley was on board with that as well. Like he always loved to see if we had a slightly different take on the way a scene could be played, because he loves to be surprised. And editorially, one of the ways we could do that in this movie was some of the way that we cut it to make it a little bit more comedic and stuff. Like I'm trying to remember. Oh, right. So on the look down scene, as we call it, the one where Josephine says, "Look down, you'll see a surprise." So Claire did that scene, and that was pretty early on. And the first time we showed him that, he was like in stitches, because it was like that was one of the first times he said, "Oh, this is it. This is the tone. This is what we want." Because it's this beautiful contrast of this like stately presentational kind of way of people having to go on a date versus this like very lurid thing that she's saying. And she's first also showing the power that she has in being kind of a seductress toward him. Ridley just ate it up. He thought it was absolutely hilarious. And then for me, the first time I showed him the cut of the dinner scene and then the cut to the sex on the bed, he almost fell out of a chair laughing so hard. And he's like, "Yeah, this is exactly the tone that we wanted."
We've talked a few times about Claire, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. Yeah. Let's talk about how you and she divided the workload. How do you divvy up such a big film? And then how do you stay in sync once the work does begin?
So first thing I should say about Claire Simpson, who's one of the greatest film editors of all time, her commitment to mentorship, not just with me, but through her whole career, is beyond admirable. Like some of the other editors that have come up under her ranks are some of the best of all time as well. So I am immensely grateful for the last 5 years of my career, because I was hired on Raised by Wolves as her first assistant, and we hit it off right away. She was already giving me things to cut early on, and then that just blossomed into more on Last Duel, more on House of Gucci, and then wanting to share the duties entirely on Napoleon. And the way that it had worked on this film and on Gucci and now on Gladiator is that we will sit together and watch the dailies from the day before. And when you're talking about the Ridley of it, there's like 9+ cameras on most days. And so it's us watching in the 9 bank on the Avid, because otherwise we would never get through everything. And then once we watch all the day's dailies, it's just like, okay, which scene do you want? Which scene do you want? And we would just divvy it up on the day, what anyone felt like doing. Though obviously I always followed her lead. And then when it came to the sequences that took more days, like the battle scenes and whatnot, she was like, "Okay, you take Waterloo. I'm going to do Austerlitz." And then she did Toulon and I did Borodino. So during the production phase, we're having to keep up with the breakneck pace of shooting that Ridley and team do, because they're just hurtling through locations and sets and all this stuff. And it was incumbent upon us to be up to camera. We had to be, or we would never be able to catch up. So it helped to have 2 editors for that alone. But during production, we would divvy up the dailies, and then we would cut away, and then we would show each other, a few days later and get feedback. And occasionally Ridley would pop in, usually on a Saturday. He was always like, "Only show me when you're ready to show me something." And we'd show him some scenes, like we'd show him the look down scene because that was early. And he was like, "Yes, I love it." And then we kind of used that to keep going through the shoot. And then the way that it worked, once we got to the end of the shoot, so we were up to camera, but there were I think there were 2 production days left, like a Monday and a Tuesday. And Ridley was going to depart immediately after the shoot on Tuesday, which was like a pickups day. And we needed to have the entire film assembled to show him that before he left. So like that Sunday before the Tuesday, we showed him the whole movie. It was 4 hours and 33. And the number one thing I think I could say is that it was relief. He was like, "Oh my God, there's a movie. Like, not that he didn't think that he could, but like, I can only imagine as a filmmaker, you're working at this breathless pace and doing all of these scenes and hoping that something is going to work out of it. And he was so relieved and so elated that he had something there. And so once we got to that point where we had the assembly done, then it was the two of us sitting together at one Avid, and we would trade who's driving on a certain day, and we would just go start to finish the whole movie. And Ridley would say, just, when you're ready, I'll come in and watch something. And so that's how it was for the entirety of the rest of the cutting.
Well, it sounds like that he has a very relaxed approach to working with editorial.
Yes. What's amazing about working with Ridley Scott is that there's an aura about him. He is an icon and a legend. There's no question. But a lot of time people just think of him as a very dry British guy. But no, he's actually hilarious. He's always trying to tell us jokes and keep everything light in the cutting room, and also just be really respectful. He's known Claire for a really long time, and he, like most of the other heads of department on his movies, these are really trusted members of the team. And so, no, he trusts us to. He gives us the roadmap for what the movie is, which is his like hand-drawn storyboards in conjunction with the screenplay. So we know kind of where he's going, but he lets us run wild with it and kind of go in the direction that we want to. So that very first screening that we show him is always for us the most important, because we are trying to, we're showing him what he shot, but also something out of the box as well, some kind of surprise. And he absolutely loves that. So he's a fantastic collaborator in the cutting room and super respectful and a lot of fun to be around, actually.
Well, I'd like to hear a little more about these hand-drawn storyboards. And I was going to ask you this in the context of these battles. And these battles, as you said, Ridley's bread and butter, are just amazing.
Yep.
What is the evolution of something like a Waterloo or Austerlitz battle? Does it start with animatic storyboards, previs? What are the elements that you get to start building this out?
Right. So Ridley says often that one of his most enjoyable moments in the early days of the film is let's see, this would have been while we were still finishing House of Gucci. Ridley was already drawing all of the storyboards for Napoleon. Like every single frame that he knew that he wanted, he was drawing. And that's always the reference that goes to every department, including ours, because he also has it done in an order that kind of at least approximates what he's thinking the cut might go to. So we have that. There's very little previs that's done. They did a little bit on Austerlitz, if I recall, because it's a very complicated thing. But honestly, we didn't end up using most of the previs in the cut. Like we just followed his storyboards. And that's really the main thing to go off from the beginning.
Are the storyboards purely just a reference, or do they actually get scanned into the Avid and cut?
Oh, you got to see this stuff. Yeah, they're called Ridley Grams. It's a whole real thing. There is an Instagram account called Ridley Grams that has most of these, and on a daily basis, they're posting them, and yeah, they get scanned and they're in the Avid. We don't necessarily cut with them because we don't really start cutting the sequence until we've got everything, and then also like he gets exactly what he drew. So like all of those shots showed up. It was a very sweet crew gift he gave to all of us, the heads department, a leather-bound book of all the storyboards from Napoleon. And it's gorgeous. It's a really stunning thing that's something that he, to this day, does. Every single movie, hand draws every frame of the film.
That beats the hell out of a satin jacket.
Yes.
So right now, Claire's in Italy working on Gladiator 2, as are you, but you're back here in the States.
Yep.
For Napoleon, were you on site? Were you back home? And either way, do you have a preference for how you like to work?
Normally, we follow the production wherever they are. So amazingly, most of Napoleon was shot in England around locations, all locations in England. And then we did 3 weeks in Malta at the very end. And so we were there for all of those things. So Ridley goes between LA and then he lives in the south of France in Provence. And the last few shows, he's wanted us to be there for his director's cut period, the official 10 weeks after the end of the shoot, where the director gets to do whatever they want with the movie. So those 10 weeks we spent in the south of France, and then we did all of the finishing in London.
South of France.
Yeah, it's a tough life for sure.
I want to go back to the beginning of the film. The first character that we meet in the film is not Napoleon, but Marie Antoinette.
Yep.
And it's a very kind of, I would almost call it kind of a rock and roll scene.
Yep.
And it's an interesting choice not to begin with Napoleon himself, but another famous figure in French history. We do see Napoleon sort of in the crowd watching what's going on.
Yes.
And not even really expressing too much. You don't get too much from him as to what he's taking in from all of this. I'd like to just get a sense from you just how you and Claire put that opening sequence together and the decisions that you made in making it that kind of, I use the term rock and roll, I don't know why, but it's just kind of just a wild scene or sequence.
She looks like a rock star in that scene.
I think that's it.
So Napoleon existed during the time of when Marie Antoinette was beheaded. But was he actually there? We were just kind of making a more thematic connection there than a literal historical one. And Claire cut that sequence beautifully, I might add. And she was the one that heard that Edith Piaf song and wanted to use that as kind of the basis to kind of set the tone of the movie, because it's a fascinating contrast, and it makes it kind of like a slight rock and roll thing, sure. And Ridley. So a number of scenes, he will shoot a bunch of off speed and slow motion and whatnot. And in that first one, he was like lean all the way into it and have it be this kind of raucous environment where Marie Antoinette is being defiant toward the people who are wanting to kill her. And there was a question of what scene starts the movie. And it just made the most logical sense to us, because it's when the revolution is really getting going, so that we can go from there directly to Robespierre, and then Robespierre gets his end as well. And Napoleon is kind of playing it cool during this whole time and just kind of letting things unfold, because he wasn't necessarily royalist or anti-royalist. He was just a soldier for the longest time and just kind of waiting for his moment to seize power.
You know, I could ask this question about any of the battle sequences. On the day, you're marshaling literally an army to create these scenes, and you don't know how it's going to play out in the cutting room. So you're just shooting a lot of primary beats, but then just a lot of just general crowd work stuff.
Correct.
The way that you and Claire manage that in the cutting room, how do you take those kind of elements and then create a cohesive battle that makes sense where it goes from A to B to C to D?
Yeah, it was a challenge. That was one of the biggest challenges. And Claire did Toulon, and that was probably the hardest one, because it was the most logistically on paper, it's like, wait, where are these guys going and who is shooting? Because there's two different directions coming off the fort. And we had Ridley's storyboards, but like he's not storyboarding 11 frames per shot, because on the day they're coming up with all kind of new things and whatnot. So that's the stuff that took the longest to put together, and because we had to approach it as audience members who are just trying to not be confused as well by like exactly what's happening at any given moment. And really just one shot at a time. Toulon was probably the most challenging. Austerlitz was the most laid out. It was kind of, I wouldn't say it was simple, but at least it was clear what the various parties were and how we were going to get to the end of that one. And Waterloo as well. Waterloo had very specific moments where then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. So with that, it wasn't as complicated to tell the story there. It's just how much story, because there's only so much charging of horses and charging of soldiers and stuff before it becomes kind of monotonous to you. So it was deciding how much battle to keep in an instance like that.
So sequences like that took the most time to do. But how would you compare them to, in terms of the challenge of just nailing the scene, something like that compared to the look down scene? Like it's all laid bare for the audience.
Yes.
Like with the action stuff, sometimes an editor has a place to hide, but with these intimate scenes, it's kind of tricky.
Yes, absolutely. And the look down scene is a perfect one. And it shows why Claire is the legend that she is. Her instincts and her experience really led a scene like that, knowing, all right, we're going to start in this beautifully composed wide shot of the two of them, and we are going to slowly get to the two close-ups. She took her time with the cuts, because it was about creating this mood, this tension between the two of them and sustaining it for a few minutes just to get us to this point where, like, the punchline of the thing is the close-up on Joaquin when he actually looks down. It's such a brilliant moment of acting that she held until the last possible moment, and it worked perfectly. So I follow her lead on all things like that. And so when it came to me doing, I'm trying to think if there's an example of it, but mainly like going back to the proper film editing grammar of understanding where the audience would need to be at this given moment and keep it simple from there. Not too many cuts. That's always the number one thing. Whenever I would maybe do a scene where I was too excited about too many different options to go in because these actors are giving us so many great things that I would show her a cut. Sometimes she'd be like, too many cuts. It's got to simplify. It's got to be the clearest version of the scene. You're not going to get every little thing that you maybe want, but you just want the best of the best stuff.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the brilliant things these actors are giving you.
Yes.
When we first started talking about doing this interview, I was just so curious about this next thing. I couldn't wait. I had to ask you this already. But there's a scene where Napoleon goes to visit Josephine after they're divorced. He's got his infamous hat on. He kisses her. His hat falls off. He puts it back on his head. Then he puts it back on her head. I was thinking like that could have been scripted, but man, that seems so natural. And I asked you, was that improv? And you said it was.
Yeah, as far as we know, yes, it was, because that was a common thing. Joaquin and Vanessa, they stuck to the script in a way for a few takes, but then like they wanted to let it breathe a little bit, and they wanted to just stay focused in the emotion that they were playing right there. And so then they were just kind of being playful with one another and letting things happen. And that specific shot, actually, and I honestly didn't notice this. And I mean, I cut the scene, but I never noticed it until like a couple of weeks ago when I saw it again. She actually knocks the hat off his head. It's behind the way that it's framed. Like you don't see her. He's going to kiss her, but she puts her hand on the backside and it knocks the hat off. And that's part of her being playful. That earlier sex scene, she's the one that's like knocking his hat off, take the hat off and whatnot. So, and then he just rolls with it and puts it on her head and has a fun little moment with her.
Well, you said that Ridley likes to be surprised by you and Claire in the cutting room.
Yes.
That kind of improv, was that specific to Joaquin and Vanessa, or in general, does Ridley encourage improv from his actors on the set?
It depends on the script for sure and what, the type of film that he's making. But on this one, the only improving was coming from the two of them for sure. Because Joaquin is such an amazing performer that when you're watching him, he's so engaging because you never know what's going to happen. I have no idea what this guy is going to say. So when Claire and I were watching the dailies, we were, wrapped, like our attention was focused on him because you're like, I don't know what's going to happen here. And there were plenty of scenes where he stuck to the script entirely. The one where the council interrogates him about why he abandoned his troops in Egypt. The take that we ended up using was mostly like, I think it was the very last or the next to last take of that scene, which was 100% improvised from Joaquin, where he does the shh and all of that stuff. And he starts naming all of the guys in the room. We were like, oh, wow, that's actually a very useful structure for us to identify a bunch of these people in the scene. So Ridley loved it because it felt like an authentic emotion coming from him at that moment. So it totally worked for us.
You talked about the needle drops, which is not something I really would have thought about. I mean, I would certainly think a lot about score, but needle drops, it's one thing if it's music that's of the era that you're from and you have a little history with it and you kind of know like, oh yeah, that would be the right beat here. Yeah. How do you go about doing that for something that takes place in this time period?
Very carefully, but we had a fantastic music supervisor. Her name is Kathleen Wallfish. In our discussions with Ridley, well before the shoot, talking about the various classical composers' music that we were considering putting in, we got Kathleen on board and she gave us all of these amazing options. Like she's the one that had provided us that Edith Piaf version of the Ka-Ira song. We always knew it was going to be a combination of needle drops and then the composer's music. And the thing from my perspective that is amazing about these classical needle drops is when you're listening to classical music, it's again, this thing that's a very stately and measured. It seems like, this is very prim and proper. And it makes this amazing contrast with the performance of Napoleon in some of these scenes where it's like inherently comical by having it like that. I'm trying to think. The needle drop we do during the coup sequence, and I'm trying to remember who the composer was. It Haydn on that? I don't remember, but it's just this amazing thing where you don't think of that piece of music as, say, like a comical piece, but played up against the performance and the shots in that sequence. It's absolutely hilarious to us.
Yeah, it seemed like you and Claire were often playing against what was happening with the music.
Yeah, we were all on board with leaning into the satire whenever we could. And from our perspective, the music choices did the heaviest lifting for us there. Having said that, we knew that there were going to be moments like in the battle scenes and stuff that we wanted to have fantastic original score. And Martin, for us, just knocked it out of the park. He was trying to blend it with the kind of classical music that we were already using, but then having its own voice. And then specifically, this was a Ridley request. He wanted Corsican voices. He wanted to always be able to go back within the music and remember where Napoleon came from. And it starts in, I think, Austerlitz, the end of Austerlitz. We bring in the Corsican voices for maybe the first time. I'm trying to remember if we did it before that. But that's the most effective one where it gets brought back to just this guy and where he's from. For us, it just worked beautifully.
So part of making those battles work so effectively, the sound design, and that is so crucial as well. Tell me a little bit about sound design for Napoleon, and were you working in 5.1 to really help with the Atmos aspect of it? How did you go about doing that in the cutting room?
Across the board, Claire and I we just do LCR the whole time because it's less complicated for us editorially. Because I mean, a movie like this, oh my God, there's going to be so many tracks and all of that, and it really is about just keeping things simple for us. And we have a really trusted sound editorial team led by Oliver Tarney and James Harrison, who we knew we were in trusted hands and that we were eventually going to get to, the master of sound mixers, Paul Massey, alongside Will Miller. And we knew that we were going to be fine. But what for me and my background coming up in editing, I did a whole lot of, I was an assistant for a long time and I had to do lots and lots of sound work. And so that's one of the tools that that I have, that one of the skills that I'm better at. So when we're first showing Ridley cuts of the movie, before even we bring any of the sound editorial, we are making it very presentational and adding lots of sound effects and design wise, we're going to push music here. We're going to push effects here. Obviously it's a giant film with big battles. And we were always kind of cognizant of not wanting to have it be too big, too fast, or too sustained. So then you're deaf by the time you get to Waterloo. And so we, from the small stage, were adding the types of effects and backgrounds that we wanted. But when we put it in the trusted hands of Oliver and James, they really breathed life into specifically the battle scenes where they're adding little things about repeated orders and stuff from guys in the field that really round out what the sonic environment would be. And from the music side, we had a fabulous music editor named Tony Lewis, who, when we got to Waterloo, for example, there were different types of drums being played for both the French side and the British side. It just adds this extra layer of character to the scene. And then all of those things come together for when we finally get to the mix stage with Paul and Will, where it beautifully comes together and becomes a real movie at that point. So sound is always a super important thing. And we're trying to build that from the very beginning. In fact, on this show, we had the sound team was on, or at least we had one sound editor on during production to help us out with some of the early stuff. I think where we call the cannon scene, the Royalist insurrection scene was an early one where we wanted both some dialogue cleanup and then just some effects help. And they were already on board helping us out. So it was a fantastic collaboration there.
So you used the term small stage in your answer there, and it reminded me of the experience, or what I would imagine the experience would be for an editor working away on a film, especially one with these large epic battles. You're looking at a 20-inch screen maybe, or even a OLED screen in your cutting room, but then you see it displayed wide on a real screen.
Oh, yeah.
Did you find that as you were looking at it projected wide, this isn't playing with the same pace, or characters are entering and leaving frames in ways that just seem different to me now that I'm looking at it on a theatrical screen?
Obviously, yes, it's always a difference. Cutting with Ridley, we have a 65-inch OLED 4K monitor, and he loves those because the contrast ratio is fabulous and the colors look great, and it's not too far off from what the theatrical thing is going to be. But we do see it on the big screen, especially to judge visual effects, to make sure that we're not missing something or that something holds up at a certain resolution. But I wouldn't say we made changes because we saw it in the theater and was oh, this isn't playing as well as it was. No, we were pretty confident. The thing that I will say that was fascinating, the conversion to IMAX was something that was very late in the game, and we weren't reviewing reels of it or anything while we were still cutting. It was only after the fact, after Sony had agreed to distribute the film, that took place. And it was just a couple of weeks ago that I got to watch like the first 2 reels of the movie in IMAX. And that is a wildly different experience. It is super cool. It's so immersive and the sound is so overwhelming that I actually can't wait to go see it like that. So I'm encouraging everyone I know to go see it in IMAX.
Before we get too far away from audio in general, do you like to edit with audio in place, or do you like to cut the scene first visually and then work with the audio?
For me personally, I cut it with the audio for sure. It's always a little bit complicated. Depends on the scene, though. With the battle scenes, I'm trying to think. Yeah, so our assistant editors, led by first assistant Danielle El-Hindi, who's fabulous. A lot of the hard part of the job in the early days is these battle scenes are all shot at different frame rates. 72 frames, 48 frames, 36 frames, all this kind of stuff. And we have our assistants get everything to 24 and sync it with the audio that way. And then we can always match back to the slower frame rate stuff. So we always have the sound available unless there is some actual shot where they went MOS, which wasn't often. But I would say from my perspective, I usually cut with the sound. I'm trying to think. Claire might do more stuff without, but I don't really recall how that worked there.
So you talked about Claire mentoring you, and you just brought up your assistant crew. And you also mentioned that sound work was a big part of what you did as an assistant.
Yep.
What do you need, or what do you look for in an assistant? What matters most to you?
Organization is the number one thing. I'm a really fastidious person just as it is. And like just having not too many bins, not too many folders, and then having the timeline tracks arranged properly where, dialogue 1 through 4, mono effects 5 through 8, stereo effects 9 to 14 or something, and then music after that. So organization is a big thing. And having sound skills is a plus, but that's something, I learned on the job. Honestly, it wasn't like I just naturally had that. It got drilled into me by previous editors that I work with. And the job of a visual effects editor, and I should say we had one of the best, Michael Chung is a fabulous VFX editor, and having to do quick comps, because we never really like to show. I mean, Ridley is totally available to see things well before, visually they're complete, but it always helps to have it temped out as quickly as possible. And people like Michael. And then when I was an assistant, it was something that I knew how to do very well, is do compositing, like quick stuff using the Avid. Not necessarily, you can use After Effects or any other programs, but for me, the speed with which using the tools in the Avid, they're perfectly fine tools for me. I survived for a while being able to do quick comps just using the Avid.
As you said, unfortunately, Claire couldn't join us today because she's over in Italy working away, as are you, but she's more internet challenged at the moment. She's done Wall Street, Platoon. She won an Oscar for Platoon. Constant Gardener, nominated for an Oscar. And then, of course, all the films that she's done with Ridley Scott. Knowing that, what do you ask her about the most? Platoon or Chud, her first feature?
Exactly. Yeah, I ask her about all of the things. But the one as an editor, that it's just so fascinating to me. The cutting room that she ran on Wall Street is unbelievable. So it's Claire Simpson, Joe Hutching, Pietro Scalia, David Brenner, Julie Monroe, Mark Lavolsi.
Crazy.
All of those people were absolute legends. And so before I worked with Claire, I worked with Joe Hutching on a number of films for a few years. And he's another fantastic mentor to me. And Claire is such a special person and such a special editor that she wants to bring you into the process and with open arms and is very supportive. And, I wouldn't have this opportunity if it wasn't for her championing me on each of the films and telling Ridley on this one that she wanted to share with me. And he was fully on board. So I'm trying to think if there's other ones that I ask her about. All the Money in the World's a fascinating one, with him having to replace the actor. After they were done, they were completely done, and had to bring everybody back together and make it happen in no time, and got an Academy Award nominated performance out of Christopher Plummer. In fact, another thing to say about Claire, the amount of actors that she has edited to Academy Award nominations and wins is staggering. Kate Winslet, The Reader, Rachel Weisz, Constant Gardener, Michael Douglas in Wall Street, that Gordon Gekko thing. That's amazing. And so I think actors are very lucky when she is the editor on the show, because it's going to turn out well for them.
Absolutely. Well, Sam, be honest with me. Do you think she actually bailed out because she thought I was going to bring up Chud?
Maybe. No, she loves Chud. Is a hilarious, fantastic movie. And she talks about that being, it was a bunch of friends of hers in New York City. And that was her first movie. And she had a blast doing that.
All right. You tell her that I want to talk about that one someday.
I will.
Well, you heard him. Pencil that one in right now. Claire Simpson talking chud with yours truly. Maybe we'll talk about a few other things too if she wants. I very much enjoyed talking Napoleon with Sam. Let's give a big Ridley Scott battle-sized thank you to him for coming on the show today to meet with us. I am sure we'll be looking him up again next year when the Gladiator sequel comes out. Say, why wait until next year to learn about Media Composer? And I don't even mean next year as in a month from now. I mean you should start learning Media Composer right now. Why? Because there's so much to learn. You heard Sam talking about using things like Fluid Morph to refine performances, and the effects tools to do quick comps. You can do all that too, plus a lot more. And the best way for you to learn about all that Media Composer has to offer is to click that link in the show notes that will catapult you on over to avid.com. Hurry now, click that link. Okay, we're done. Again, show's over. Hope you liked it. Maybe I'll see you next week. That would be cool. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.